We're good.
All right. Welcome, everybody.
Okay,
My
I
name
think
is
we're getting
Paul
close to
Luthrop.
it.
I'm the Deputy Director of New Media for the Second Amendment Foundation. This is the Armed Society podcast. I have the wrong graphic up when we go to the foreshot. But we're going to just work with what we have to work with here. Where am I going here? This is, merge this in.
There we go.
There we are. What we're going to be doing tonight, of course, joining me is Rob Campbell and Amanda Suffecool. They are the people behind Eye on the Target Radio. You hear me talk with them and about them all the time. And so what we're going to be talking about tonight is collecting, or what my mother referred to what I do as hoarding.
There's a difference between collecting and hoarding, but we'll talk a little bit about the difference between collecting and hoarding. Yes.
Okay. So let me go ahead, you folks. I'm gonna work on getting the weekly bullet out of there and the Armed Society up there. So
there we go. So I want to say thanks to our friend Tyrone for coming on to the show. I asked if he could do that, and he was like, sure, I can use the camera that my wife takes piano lessons with. So I truly appreciate the fact that she loaned it and that you're willing to go with it. So here we go. So this is our friend Tyrone Phillips, and as you can probably tell, as soon as he opens his mouth, he's from the South. And
No.
So Rob and I are the children of a collector, and I have to say that I think that, when did you get involved in the Ruger collectors and just kind of collecting in general, Tyrone?
Well, I started fooling with Rugers in the late 70s, but I didn't call myself a collector for a long time because I was more of an accumulator. And over the years, it wasn't until the late 80s and early 90s era, I was looking at getting into expanding my knowledge to the point that I started accumulating material, primarily paperwork, books, catalogs, things of this nature, so that I could learn more about the Ruger firearms that I enjoyed. So I would say it was more of a progression from being a shooter to an accumulator to a collector.
And I think that's the path that most people take, right?
Well, usually you buy one gun, and then when you buy your second gun, now you're a collector. You got a collection, right? But a lot of people don't have a direction.
Sometimes how you look at it.
A lot of people don't have a direction in their collection. Say, my dad collected 357 Rugers. He had a lot of other stuff that he shot, but his primary collection was Ruger 357 Magnums. And my mother collected paperwork.
Yes, I remember.
And she had trunks full of all kinds of stuff like that. But it's funny when you start going to the gun show every weekend. You start meeting people, and you make, I guess, contacts that you keep forever.
Well, I was going to say, I think we met Tyrone in the early 80s. That's kind of where I remember it. So that would be 40 years ago there, sir.
Be careful, you're telling our age, darling.
I'm just saying.
Actually, it was in the early 80s. It was in the early 80s that I went to a gun show, and a fine gentleman by the name of Bill Ham had a display of some Ruger stuff. And I remember the name of the display was called Four of a Kind. And I was so fascinated by how he had collected these four firearms and built a display around those four firearms, and with kind of a theme, and it was kind of almost like a poker thing with cards and chips, and put a four of a kind of a card thing. So that was my first exposure to Ruger collecting on a scale beyond just being an accumulator and thinking I was kind of one of an oddball people out there. And Bill Ham was the first one to get me interested into looking at the collecting end and studying more about collecting Ruger firearms and the equipments that go with it. So I started accumulating stuff, and primarily catalogs, paperwork, dealer price list, newsletters, anything that would give me details that were fact from the factory, rather than my cousin Joe bought this gun from Ruger and it looked like, the stories we all hear. And as I say, buy the gun, not the story. So when we were looking at things like that, that's what I was doing. I was looking at what I was getting, and by having the paperwork, I found it very interesting, because over the years people have asked questions, and I say, let me look that up. And I go to my catalogs, I go to my paperwork, I go to the things I have to verify the facts as they were presented from the factory. So this helps the historical end of the collecting.
Well, and that makes so much sense, because that's the heart of a collector, I think, is taking one thing and starting to really, really drill into it, and drilling enough that you then become the go-to, where people have questions, and those are things the answer to. And so we want to just kind of talk about collectors in general. Yeah? What?
Well, I say, you say that I know the answer to. I tell people all the time, I still feel like a neophyte and a beginner compared to some of the other collectors I know. Like I said, Bill Ham, been at it a lot longer than I have. But at the same time, your dad was doing it long before I was. And I actually looked up to him and what he had put together in his 357 collecting to go along with what my thoughts and ideas were about collecting in general. So I learned from a lot of people, and I still am open-minded. I'm always learning and wanting to do more to where I have a better, knowledge base. And it kind of amazes me how often people will ask a question that, to me, on one hand, it may seem like everybody should know it, and then I have to step back and say, wait a minute, this is somebody that's new that doesn't know that. This is a chance to educate and share the hobby. So collectors in general, no matter what the subject, is the key to a good, and having the factual material to back it up is always fun, especially when you can relate back to, say, someone. Let's make a fun example. Let's say someone from the Ruger factory has something, and they didn't collect, or they didn't have the background. Then they ask the collector, what do you know about this? Because the factory still doesn't keep a lot of the paperwork. There's some retired employees I was in contact with for several years that supplied me with things. They said, we throw that stuff out. To me, that was almost a crime, because there's where the history sits. And preserving that history is the key to a good collection, to further it on. Like, your dad was into it, and God rest his soul, we're continuing on his list of the 357s. So the knowledge keeps going. And I think collectors in general appreciate that.
Now, you have to be pretty close-minded to say that you know everything about everything. Even after you think you know a lot, somebody will show you something that's not in the normal line of things, and now you're learning new stuff. And my dad would learn it all the time. He kept a notebook in his pocket, and he wrote down everything he ever saw. He wrote down what kind of sight it had, what kind of hammer it had, any finish issues or stuff, the amount of notes and stuff that he always was going through. And
and then he would take it home and compare it to his list and say, was that legit? Wasn't that legit?
Right.
And so that was really one of the things. I mean, that one of my favorite stories of Dad the collector was the fact that, so for everybody else, Dad was a numbers guy. So every serial number that he ever saw on a Ruger 357, he would write it down, and the features. So what he ended up with was this infamous list that was every manufacturing variation as it happened. When Ruger changed, from one manufacturer to a different
back in
one.
the early 80s, the only books that were out there were John Dugan's books.
Mm-hmm.
And Dugan would be able to get into the factory once in a while and look through the numbers. And he said that there was only like 50 10-inch guns with the 6-groove barrel and 50 10-inch guns with the 8-groove barrel. And when Dad goes through and he's finding all stuff, he would find batches of them. There was a lot more than 50 guns, but they would be made in batches of like 25 guns.
Mm-hmm. And so I remember that Dad was at an OGCA show, so the Ohio Gun Collectors Show, which is people come from all over the place to go to the OGCA show. And somebody walks up to him, and he was in Danny Tanko's booth. And so Dan was famous for, they called him the Ruger guy. And so Dad was sitting there, and this was toward the end of his life. So he was a little bit smaller, in his wheelchair, he didn't really have a lot of impressive presence at that
kind of
point.
rickety looking.
He was pretty darn rickety looking. And this guy who walks up, and he has a 10-inch Ruger 357 in the box, and he was showing Danny, and he was so proud of himself. And Dad sat there, and he said, "What's the serial number?" And the guy said, "Well, it's blah, blah, blah." And Dad said, "It won't let her." And the guy got a case of the crank, and he was like, who the hell are you to tell me what, blah, blah, blah. And Dan says, "Well, can I introduce you to Bob Campbell, Mr. Bob Campbell?" And the guy just swore, put the lid back on the box, and went back to get his money back. Because if Mr. Bob Campbell said that the numbers weren't right and it wasn't going to get a factory letter, then that was
That's
it.
thing is, Dad wrote down so many numbers, and then he would put it in the computer programs over and over and over again. I don't know how many. There had to be 80, 90 pages on this list of, in fine print, that are from like serial number 2 to right to the end of the old models.
Right. So the interesting thing in the stuff that happens with either, with Rugers or with really anything, let's talk a little bit about the value of, if you want to be a collector, just going and hanging out with other collectors. Not being a jackwagon about it, but just going and asking questions. Tyrone?
Well, yeah, and going back to what you just said about your dad, not, telling the guy the gun would not let her. Your dad was a collector. He knew the guns. He had the education. And sadly, there are people out there that will put together something and try to claim that it is something that it is not. And so this goes back to having the background, the factory information, the catalogs, the detailed records, everything that we can put together as collectors to verify or help verify what has actually been built and is authentic versus what we like to call kitchen table gunsmiths that put something together to make a profit. And so if you really want to learn about things, you do get to the other collectors. You go to shows like, you mentioned OGCA. Well, they have a show once a year where the Ruger Owner Collector Society steps in and does a display. They get a couple of aisles, and we have displays of all kinds of Rugers. And it's an excellent place to get knowledge by coming and hanging out with the other collectors. And you can start talking to them. And if you have an interest in the Ruger number 1s or the 357 Blackhawks or the double action revolvers, anything, there's going to be somebody there that can help you learn more about what you're interested in. And that goes exactly back to what, your dad was sitting there with Tanko. The guy comes up thinking he's bought a rare gun, but when your dad said it won't let her, the guy realized that he may have been scammed a little bit, knowingly or unknowingly. So going back to the collectors and getting the information is valuable. There are references. Bob, you mentioned earlier about the first publication with John Duke, and actually there was Ross did some publications and some other books that were earlier that listed things, but over time, between Dugan's work and other people's work, some of the stuff that was in print in the 70s has been updated, corrected, and is more in-depth now because there was a push with the Ruger Collectors Association and members to learn more. So,
well, even some of the stuff that was in, even some of the stuff that was in, even some of the stuff that was in Dugan's first book that we had found was different and had changed by the time the second book came out.
Yes.
And so it's and
yes,
a lot
absolutely.
of that stuff today is so different from what reality is because 40 years has
passed since then.
Let me
so,
ask,
Paul, you were going to say,
let me jump in. I'm going to ask a newbie question here because I think something may be going over viewers' heads here. What is lettering?
Oh, okay. Tyrone, answer that.
Yeah, good point. Good point. Yeah, the factory. If you go to collecting Colt, Smith & Wessons, or other guns, you can apply for, through their associations and everything, a letter from the factory as to how a firearm was built. Now, to get some of the letters, like say a Colt, can cost you more than $100. You have to, I think, submit it to the Cody Firearms Museum because I think they have all the Colt records. With Ruger, they have their records. So you submit a letter to Ruger with your firearm and serial number and basic description. They will look it up and send you a short letter with some of the information on how the gun was shipped as and when it was shipped. And even now, they're even saying the first place it was shipped to. So, you know, you can get some verification documentation if you pay for a factory letter. So that kind of helps verify what the firearm originally was built and shipped as. So that is a key point in collecting, especially for new collectors. So good question, because a lot of people don't understand what getting a letter is.
One time, my dad looked at one of his friends had a flat top 44 that was supposed to be built for one of the shows by Ruger for like the NRA show. It was nickel plated, and they had a factory letter, and on the letter it said no finish specified. Well, Dad was afraid of it because of he thought that the letter just said that they didn't specify that it was nickel plated. But I said, since none of the other letters even mentioned finish because they all come out blued, this one being that they wanted it built with no finish, was what I believed. And one of his other friends had bought the gun instead, but it was a super deal, and I think it was correct with that no finish specified on the paperwork.
And it's like a big puzzle on that kind of stuff. But here's another interesting point: is if you are a Colt collector, if you send in for a letter and Colt digs in and finds out that your gun's got provenance and it's worth something,
if it was just sold to Susan Roebuck in 1888, it cost you $150 for the letter. If it was sold to Bat Masterson, now it costs you a percentage of what they estimate the value of the gun
to be. So they use that as a profit center. So when they come back to you and say that it'll be $23,000 for your factory letter, you're like, okay, where do I send the check? Because obviously my gun is way worth it.
Exactly, and that's the other thing I do like about Ruger is for $10 you'll get a basic letter. Now you won't get all the features because the access to their records, sadly, Bill Ruger wasn't a fan of the collectors, and since the passing of his son-in-law, Steve Vogel, who had an interest in collecting and helping the collectors in the Ruger world, there hasn't been a factory presence that really pushed to organize and get the records together, identify a lot of the Ruger firearms. So the special features like nickel plating or things of this nature are hard to get the provenance on. But Ruger will tell you the day it was shipped, the model, how it was shipped, where it was shipped to, and that can help make a difference in key features of the value of the gun. And they only charge $10 for a letter, which is a fantastic fee to get even that little bit of information. And it's funny you mentioned the nickel plating. A former employee who's retired, a wonderful lady, used to work for Steve Vogel, and when he passed and she was doing some things and cleaning up, there was a nickel-plated cylinder on his desk. And he was using it for kind of a paperweight type thing. It was where they had actually tested nickel plating and were firing extremely hot ammo. In fact, there's 2 cases still stuck in the cylinder. And it was given to me, but there's no way to totally verify that it was ever in whatever gun and how that gun was built, because this cylinder, obviously, the nickel plating is peeling, and you could tell that was 2 stuck cases. They were firing some pretty hot loads in it. For me, it's a great little novelty to have an item that came off Google's desk that is a nickel-plated thing, which Ruger never went into production, but I can't verify.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
I've kept the notes on who I got it from and everything. But again, they experimented with a lot of things. Any kind of provenance, like you say, that unspecified finish would point to the idea that it was maybe a test example gun. So, yeah, the collectors go into certain details that can really confuse new people. Some of the minor details of the various models can get really down to a confusing aspect to new collectors. And, you know, we always want to get new people into collecting.
Let's go to something about some people who want to just get into collecting. How do you start, or a lot of times you get a chance to buy a couple different guns at the same gun show or something. One of them is a little bit rougher than the other one, but the one that you're looking at looks like it might have been refinished. The one with the honest face is usually worth more money in the long run than the one that has been refinished or done something, has something funny about it. So you need to think about, it's not like a classic car where the restoration makes it worth more money. The restoration actually detracted from the value of the gun.
Generally speaking, you're 100% correct. And what I tell people that are new into getting into the idea of collecting, the first thing I actually suggest is join the Red Eagle News Exchange with Chad Hiddleston. The information that Chad puts out and the Ruger reference guide that he has put together is an invaluable resource that was been gathered over decades and put together in a simple form so that people can look up a firearm and determine a lot about it and the little minor things that it should or should not have. That reference guide is, to me, worth 10,000 times more than the subscription price of getting the Red Eagle News Exchange. And that would be the first thing I tell everybody as a collector, the Red Eagle News Exchange, because it's $25 a year and you get a quarterly publishing, but as a new subscriber, you get a copy of the reference guide. And that reference guide has allowed me to find firearms, look up their features, know what they should or shouldn't be, and help me determine the value of what I was looking at buying. So that's the number one thing. The next is join an active group of collectors, such as a Ruger Owner Collector Society, and then go to their shows, display shows. They do them in Tulsa, they do them in Idaho, they do them in OGCA, they do them in Alabama, and go visit the gun show, see these displays, collectors. You will learn so much in such a short weekend that you'll be amazed, and it'll make you want to learn more. And
if you go
then, of course, there's websites.
Well, if you go in and shake hands and introduce yourself, you'll have a great time too, because you'll make friends that you'll have for years and years.
I want to bring in a social media comment
exactly
here.
Right.
Charlie Chambers over on Facebook. I don't know why it's not popping. Let me pop that in again. I don't know why. For some reason, but Charlie Chambers says, great Ruger history. My first pistol buy as a teenager was a Ruger Mark II. Charlie, you're dating yourself, man. Teenagers haven't been able to buy pistols in a while. So.
And then the question is, on that Ruger Mark II, could you take it apart and put it back together?
Well, Mark II came out in 1982, so Mark II came out in 1982, and I'm not sure what state he was in 82. A lot of teenagers still couldn't buy guns.
Right.
So it depends. But I understand. I bought my first handgun at 15, but my mother actually had to do the legal transaction. So, that's true. Ruger collecting, or any kind of collecting, if you start young and you have an interest and you expound on it, then you can learn so much more. And I mean, in this age of the internet and instant knowledge, it's really so different than what it was 30, 40 years ago of this. And I have met so many wonderful people, new friends that I've met or got to know, and their knowledge as well as their interest are diverse enough that no matter what your interests are, you're still accepted. And it has been a fantastic thing to be able to expand the knowledge base. Because when I first met, like say, Bill Ham in that display, I had no clue about anything like this. And now people ask me about doing displays, and I say, just do it. I don't care what it looks like. Put what you like out. Here's a few guidelines. Just jump in and do it. And I have a wonderful friend that he very cautiously took my advice. And I was so learned that he won an award at the Tulsa show last year for his displays. And he has progressed, and he'll tell everybody that, you know, he just followed my advice and jumped in, and now he's really got a good collection. He's learned a lot, and he's made a lot of friends. He'd say exactly what you were talking about. Get involved, and the information's out there. And we collectors truly enjoy sharing our hobby. So, yeah,
we would spend
most of
the winter building a display, and then haul it, load it, figure out how to break it down, put it on the truck, and haul it around. But the amount of guns that Dad bought when he was on the road, because he would be showing his stuff off, other people come and say, "Oh, I got a gun like this or that," and he would get some really nice, rare pieces just by showing the pieces that he had.
I want to get a couple more comments in here.
Yeah, and I saw Amanda drop her head kind of laughing because of one of the very first shows I ever went to. Bob and the clan, the Campbell clan, came and helped Bob set up his whole display and everything, and that's exactly what you're talking about. Everybody would come and help Bob set everything up, and I looked and I said, well, he gets all the credit, but I can see the clans behind him 100%. So it's kind of fun to see that. But you're right about finding things, and you know there's a ton of stories out there that because you're a collector or have a display, that you will wind up finding things for your collection that you wouldn't have expected. And one of my favorites is we were doing a Ruger collector show, and I had a display, and a gentleman came and made a beeline to my display. He says, "I've got a gun just like that, but I need this base pin for it, a part." And there was an older woman following him, and I didn't think much about it at first. And he said, "I've got this base pin. This guy's got these parts for sale over here, and I want to see if it's the same one." I looked at it and said, "No, that's the wrong one." He said, "Well, he's got a bunch of parts. Can you help me find the right one?" And it turns out the lady was from the other table where all these parts were. And she'd kind of followed him so he wouldn't run off the part, I guess. So I had my friend watch my table. I went over, and here it is, a gun show with several. I mean, there's 40 Ruger collectors running around, and there was nothing parts. And the majority of them were Ruger parts, and many of them were old Ruger parts. Nobody had found it, including myself, until this guy had me go look. And I spent a couple of hours digging through those parts, and I've probably got so many guys said, just make a list of them, and I'm making a list of how. It turns out I think it was a gun shop somewhere, 3 of this and 3 of this and 3 of this, and all these never got used. And he was selling them. And I remember I made up a list, gave it to me, so I'll figure it out, I'll tell you what you owe me. And I went back to my table, he'd come back, that woman would come over, handed me a piece of paper with the amount of money I owed him. And when I looked at it, I was a little shocked because it was extremely low for what the collector value of a lot of the parts I took were. And I gladly paid the bill. And I kind of chuckled about all these collectors missed all that. And I found it accidentally because a guy was looking for a part. So you never know where it's going to come at. But when you pull one out from under the other collector's nose, you kind of smile.
You can't smile,
Yeah.
exactly.
I've got one more comment I got to get to here. Sorry.
Okay, somebody in the comments wanted to know if we were going to be talking about the
Yes.
SCOTUS for New York State Rifle and Pistol Association. We're actually going to do a feature on it for next week, and so we'll have people on that really understand it next week. And so I'm having Holly Sullivan, because I'm going to be doing that show. Holly Sullivan from CC Connecticut Citizens Defense League, and Teresa Einacker from CNJFO, which is I don't know, New Jersey Firearms Owners, so something. But Holly is the female president. Well, she's the president, and she just happens to be a female, of one of the largest gun organizations, state rights organizations, which is CCDL. And Teresa is actually a lawyer who is licensed to practice law at the Supreme Court level. And so we're going to get into the depth of it. We're going to get into who else is jumping on, what it means, what could be the positives of it, what could be the negatives of it, all of those aspects of it. And we just couldn't coordinate it for this week's show. So it will definitely be next Wednesday. So stay tuned in, 7 o'clock Wednesday.
Charlie Chambers also replied.
Sounds like a good one.
He says, referring to his previous, the Ruger Mark II, ooh, they are tough. I bought it in North Carolina at Aiden Guns Unlimited. Breaking it down is difficult. 19, I think, and I think that 19 is when he got it. So, yeah, maybe not all that long ago.
His
Charlie,
age, yeah. He's still.
Yeah. Well, the breakdown, tell him that the breakdown is not hard once you do it 1,000 times.
There you go.
I said taking it apart's easy. It's putting it back together is the tricky part. It's got to stand on your head and shake it.
You got to get it back together and take it back down.
Yeah, I'm really good at disassembling almost anything. Reassembly for me is the issue.
We would have people come and bring us guns in shoe boxes for that reason.
I get a lot of them in gallon bags.
Shoe boxes, plastic bags. Yep. You see it all.
So let me ask another newbie question. Obviously, Ruger is of interest here. When collecting Rugers, is there a holy grail? Is there a Ruger out there that is super collectible but just hasn't been found yet?
Yeah.
Well,
the duplicate of the Ross gun.
There is
the duplicate of the Ross gun has got to be the holy grail.
One of the Spanish engraved would be even harder to get.
Okay, so explain what that means. Explain that.
Okay. The Ross guns and the Spanish engraved and the Jarrett engraved, everybody's got a different idea of what a Grail gun would be to them. For me, my Grail gun for many years was just a simple Hawkeye pistol. It took me 35 years from the time I handled and shot my first one to own one. And I found guns that were rarer, but they just didn't come along, and I couldn't get one when it took me 35 years. Now I have a few more than that, and they will actually be on day this July at OGCA. But the Ross gun was a collector by H.W. Ross who found a difference in some guns in the 357s that were what would be classified among the collectors as a Type 1, but the serial number range was in a later type series. So there were about 800 guns of the Ross variation that would have Type 1 features, but with a Type 2 or 3 serial number. Then the engraved
wait. Stop right there. Wait. Yeah. Tyrone, stop right there. Let's explain to everybody, because everybody's like, okay, I don't know what you just said, but let's explain what that means. So what that means and what the story is on the Ross gun, because you got to take it into a story. The story on the Ross gun is the 357 was Bill Ruger's first centerfire gun, and he's building along at them. And when the Ross guns come in, they were like in the 5,000
serial number range. Supposedly, a Ruger or a Marley representative wanted a Ruger 357 Magnum, and Ruger didn't want him to know that they had only made 5,000 guns, so he had them stamp a 1 in front of the serial number, so it was a 15,000 serial number, and
he told the number stamper to start, He didn't tell the
Them to
number
stop.
stamper to stop.
So they stamped about 800 guns before they finally stopped. And then when they finally got to that, I believe it's they're Type 2 guns. The front sight is the main difference on the two of them. But when they got to the 1,500 or 15,000 serial number range, they just skipped over those. So there's no duplicates of those Ross gun numbers versus the other.
But for years, everybody was looking to see if they could find a duplicate so that there were two serialized guns that were slightly different, yet they were the same serial number. That was the holy grail, was if the factory had not caught that they'd already done that because they jumped forward in time and then jumped back.
Another thing that is super rare and valuable, no one, it's got to be out there, but no one's ever seen one, is for a long time, the Ruger pistol came with a plastic grip on, a black plastic grip. And for $5 more, you could get a walnut grip, an Italian walnut grip. Or for, I think it was $15, you got stags, and I think it was $25 or $35, you got ivory. Well, no one has ever seen the box that those ivory or stag grips have come in. So that they got the grips, but they've never seen just the box for those particular grips.
And that box would be worth hundreds of dollars. Hundreds of dollars.
Several hundred, if it possibly into the thousands. But you're correct.
Right.
And, you're right about that. The Grail gun finding a
Go ahead.
The Grail gun of finding a duplicate to a Ross gun would be a extremely rare find if you could verify it. And then, back to the engraved guns, Bill Ruger was looking at getting into having some guns engraved. He commissioned Charles Jarrett to engrave some guns, and he also sent some to Spain. The Spanish engraved guns, I think there's only around, I could be wrong on the number, somewhere around 25 Spanish engraved. And there's only about 259, if my memory's right, total engraved guns. So Charles Jarrett did the majority of the engraved guns. These guns were special. They were shipped in a separate box, and they are Grail gun for people. So that goes into the single action line, but then there's other models of guns like the early standard auto, one of the very first ones. Those things a lot of people look at, and I think the Ruger factory still has number 1 or number 2 that they actually put on display a few years ago at the SHOT Show. And so I got to see it in person. But finding, everybody has a different Grail gun. And as a collector, you focus your collecting on what you enjoy. And like I said, somebody that collects double actions will probably have a different Grail gun than someone that collects single actions or 357s or the 2 single 6s or the standard autos or, whatever. Everybody's looking for that particular very low production, hard to find, unusual piece. Except for me, for many years, it was a Hawkeye.
Made it out of the factory, like an XGI or a Hawkeye and a non-standard caliber.
Yeah, something where they were experimenting, and then it came out. Right. Like Lane Pierce's 15-inch barrel gun.
Yep.
Right? They made 2 of them, and somebody.
I think somebody else now owns that gun.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Oh, who's got some? Never mind.
I think it's moved to Alabama. I think it moved to Alabama.
Got it.
Yeah.
It's that kind of thing. Tell them the story, because there were 2 of those 15-inch barreled guns. There were originally 2.
Well, I'm not as up on that. I know there was a couple of them, and I remember a gentleman, Dave Whitman, had one of them display years ago at one of our collector shows. So I got to see it there, and he was looking for a printed material because somewhere there was a article where somebody had taken one of those guns and had gone hunting with it, and I think they'd shot a bobcat. And you got to realize this goes back into the 60s. So shooting and hunting bobcats was more accepted by some people. But the gun has moved around a little bit, but I think when they did 2 of them, from what I remember, I think one of them had the barrel cut back later, so there's actually only 1 left. And,
correct.
Like I said, it's become a rather rare gun to own. But then, you mentioned a while ago about the factory letters and Colt getting a provenance of who it might ship to. Well, in the Ruger collecting, certain guns have provenance as well. And Elmer Keith is well known as basically like the grandfather of the 44 Magnum that got Remington started into building it, and Bill jumped in, and Smith & Wesson and Ruger both in 44 Magnums about the same time. And Elmer Keith wound up with a one-off production short barrel 44 Magnum that he had done. So provenance of having a well-known gun writer like Elmer Keith, or someone famous owning it, that's another kind of Grail to look for. So there's a number of different types of Grail guns as to how you view a collection and the history combined with the firearms in general. So that's always fun there.
Holy Grail gun is any gun owned by Alcatraz.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's I'm telling you, recently, about 2 years ago, Sammy Davis Jr.'s semi-auto, he's 45. It was,
1911 was
in a California gun buyback, and they destroyed it. They said it was for $3,000, and I was like, holy crap, I would pay $3,000 to own Sammy Davis Jr.'s gun. And then I was talking to somebody at the Ruger Museum, and they said that they had gone in to buy it for the historical value of it, and California wouldn't sell it to them and destroyed it.
That's the horrific part of those gun buybacks.
Right. There's so many horrific parts about the gun buybacks. They didn't, Yeah,
funny you mentioned Sammy Davis Jr. Most people don't realize he was actually a big fan of the single-action firearm design and was a very good quick-draw artist. And I was talking to the world champion fast draw, Bob Munden, several times, and he actually owned a couple of Sammy Davis's single-action six guns. And I was fortunate enough to be able to see them and handle them myself. And they were very, very well-built six guns. But Sammy Davis was a very avid collector and single-action six guns. And, we talk about the history of things.
When he did the spaghetti westerns, he did his own gun handling. So when he was playing in there and doing that stuff, he did his own stuff, as did Jerry Lewis. Jerry Lewis was a very skilled gun handler.
Another person was Jerry Lewis. Yeah, another one like most people wouldn't think of is Jerry Lewis, and the comedian, the clown, but he was actually also a very good quick draw artist. And those kind of guns with a provenance, and you can link the history back and things like this. It is quite interesting when you start looking for collecting for Grail guns or an interest you may have, and it can lead you down a trail that you never would have imagined when you get started. I mean,
you learn.
Rob, you and Amanda are perfect examples of that.
Too is if you want to get into collecting, if you just start with on sale 1911, you want to get a 1911. There's plenty of 1911s that are in people's dresser drawers and that they bought years ago for a couple of bucks. They've been using them. You could still get a good deal on a really nice rare Colt. If you're looking for a gun that was at the Alamo, you're not going to get a deal on a gun from the Alamo because there's very few of those that are out there. If you want a new Ruger and you like that and you want to get a couple of older models, there's a good chance you'll find them at yard sales and gun shows and different things like this because people bought them, they use them, they keep them in their dresser, and then they want to sell them. If you want something that's pretty rare, you got to remember to reach in deep in your pockets for it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the timing. Right now, we are losing the greatest generation, and that was the start of people who really had firearms. They came home and they were more from tools to recreation.
Well, after World War II, people had money. They didn't before that. They didn't really have money. So when they came home from the war, they got good jobs. They lived in the suburbs. They had money. They started collections, and this was the most popular gun collecting group of people out there. Prior to that, you did have some gun collectors, but nothing like you do today. And And as some of these guys now are passing on, their collections come up for sale, and there's some stuff out there that you will not get another chance at. It's going to go into someone else's collection for 40 or 50 years until they pass away. And so if you see it, you got to buy it, and it's kind of funny. One time we had the guy who owns one of the gun auctions on, and we asked him about some rare guns, and he had a Japanese Type 97 sniper rifle with the case and all the stuff, and I asked him about how rare some of the stuff was, and he was all excited about Elvis Presley's gun he had sold one time. But this Type 97 sniper rifle was so rare, you never seen them with the glass and the case and the boxes and all the stuff that goes with it, because the guy if he lived to tell about it, he was supposed to destroy the optics on the gun before he was captured. And
Yeah.
If I could interject
Yeah.
one thing here
And,
quick,
you know,
I'm not a
that goes
collector
back to it.
myself, but the one that I've always heard about is talking about Grail Guns. My understanding is there are a series of 1911s that were actually issued to soldiers in World War II that were manufactured by the Singer Sewing Machine Company. Now, if you think about it, a sewing machine is a very intricate piece of machinery that's got to operate a very specific way. So going into firearm, making that transition to firearms shouldn't be that big of a deal. But it was my understanding is a very limited run, and if you run across one of those, it is absolutely a life-changing amount of money you could get for it.
Right, the Singer is a rare
You're right.
piece. They made about 500 of them. Actually, when they turned in their first order, the quality was so good that the government pulled their contract for 1911 and put them on making Norden bomb sights. So that's why there was only just that one run of Singer machine pistols. There was a couple other manufacturers too that were the same way, that they got into.
Husqvarna?
No, they built some stuff for overseas.
Okay.
But the Union Signal and Switch is a rare 1911 manufacturer. So they made train stuff and got into making pistols. There's one. I can't think of it. It's something quality, something American. It's if you read about it, it's a super rare version. Also, the government bought 1911 pistols, and then after World War I, they didn't need anymore, so they stopped. And then in 1926, they changed the design to the 1911 A1, and then they didn't bother to buy any new pistols. They just changed the design and said, this is what the new pistol is going to look like. And then in 1937, they seen the war was coming. They went to Colt. They wanted pistols. Well, Colt couldn't make them fast enough. The very earliest ones that came with Colt bluing. They actually had some the safety parts inside the gun that weren't supposed to be in there. They took them out and left the holes inside the guns for these sword safe things. These early guns in the blue in that serial number range, a lot of them went to the Navy and the Marine Corps, and they're quite valuable. I had a friend who sold one for $40,000. So having the right pistol with the right box and in perfect condition it pays off. So,
It's pretty interesting. Well, Steve says that he had one made by Ithaca.
Yes.
Yeah, Remington made them. Ithaca made them. Well, Remington Rand, who was the sewing machine or the typewriter company, Ithaca made them. Colt built them. The funny part was Colt had all their old machinists had their own notes, and when they made the gun, they made them to work. When the government went in and took the prints and took them to the other factories, when they put them together, none of the guns would fit together because they didn't have the old timer who knew what he was doing. He didn't tell them on the print what to change.
Because they all modified a little bit. This is a little under. Right. This is a little over.
Yep. So they made the Colt guns would work, but none of the other ones would. They had to go back and find out all the little handwritten notes and how to make them function.
And that's why we end up with mil-spec stuff now, where everything, here's the prints and a singular set of mil-spec prints to be able to, in a war situation, distribute them to anybody who can make, so that they all work and not just, it's not a craftsman type people.
Well, that was funny because during the Second World War, Rockwell Jukebox made 30 carbines. Inland Machine Company made Standard Products made M1 carbines. The GM's, I think the the Signal Light Lamp Corporation. They made some guns, and so anybody who had a manufacturing facility, they tried to get them to make something because they needed all the stuff for the war effort. I seen somewhere that Plymouth actually had a contract making bullets during the war.
Plymouth, the car company? Okay.
I know Ford made airplanes, but
it's funny.
The war
Ford
effort.
stopped making cars
The war effort,
and
the
built
country got
B-29s.
behind.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were making B-24s and B-25s.
Everybody got behind it, and everything was redirected for the war effort, and that's why there's so many variations. And that's where collecting can get really interesting, is when you start, chasing these particular differences, and it doesn't what you collect: Ruger, Colt, Remington, Smith & Wesson, whatever. All these things can come
on the
together
1911
at the same time. You can have a whole section.
On the 1911 pistol, they count the amount of diamonds between the bolt holes on the grip, and that way they can tell if that grip actually is built for Colt or for Remington or for. And it's they've gone to that much. Somebody's counted so many grips.
Everybody's pattern was slightly different.
Yep. So somebody has counted so many grips that they can say for sure that these grips were Colt grips, these grips are Remington grips, and it was just funny that by counting the diamonds, because there's no other markings on the grip.
Steve Moret just commented, of course, none of this history is shared with our youth anymore, and that is unfortunate. That these stories are kind of going away with the original collectors.
And that's why the collectors are always looking for somebody, and that's why they're doing the display shows and
to try to get the younger guys. The big problem you got is a young guy who's got a family doesn't have the money that it takes to get a collection, and so by the time they get to where they're growing up and they can afford to put some money into their collection, now they're no longer young guys again.
Well, there's a little bit of that, and the collecting group has to be inclusive. So when somebody comes and their stuff isn't quite the thing, kind of like in car collecting, as long as it goes 55 miles an hour in the other lane and it's got a decent paint job that you can see it, then it should be good enough. But there's the snooty ones who just want to be like, yours isn't good enough.
When we had the gun shop, though, we would get a lot of kids that come in with they play the video games, and they'd come in and want to see a certain kind of a gun. I didn't know it by the video game name, but when they could point it out, I could tell them all about what the original one was, and a lot of times the dad would be like, well, leave him alone, he's trying. I'm like, no, this guy's the future of my industry. I want him to have a huge gun collection someday.
I want him to know.
Well, you mentioned the younger crowd not being as interested, and then you get the snooty crowds and stuff, but I'll say I have not seen in our gun collecting groups what you would call a snooty or snobbish group that would not be inclusive at all. And I revert back to my very first display. I was invited. I felt honored to be invited. I didn't know anything about it. Didn't have a title. Didn't have a theme. I just brought a bunch of stuff out and laid it out. And I'll never forget, Bob Nelson took me aside and he said, "Can I talk to you?" And he was very gentle about it because he was afraid he was going to upset me, I think. And he said, "Let me give you some help on how to do a display." And I said, "Wonderful, talk to me." And that is an example of what I tell everybody we do. Somebody comes in, they say, "Hey, great display," or whatever, but let's try to make it better. Here's what you can do, and look at these others and show by example. I was more than willing and open-minded to accept criticism, but Bob never criticized. He just pointed out the differences in what I've done as well as what others were doing so that I could see the differences so that I could build a better display. And I keep working. I tell people I still feel like a beginner sometimes when I see some of the other displays, but at the same time I also know that I have a fair collection of things and I'm proud of what I have. I just enjoy doing the shows, and if anything, one thing about doing display shows or being a collector is when I can share my knowledge and help someone learn about a firearm. And it doesn't matter if they're young, old, or whatever. And quite often, I have some younger folks that come up and, when I say younger, 20s, 30s, and even 40s come up and say, well, I think I've got one like that, or can you tell me about this, or whatever. And I do everything I can to be the same person that Bob Nelson was with me. Help them out, get them excited, get them to be involved, because we will be passing along. I don't want to be one of those old people that dies and nobody learns what I taught. Go ahead.
Some of it too is when you're going to display. Sometimes you just take too much stuff, and if you got 10 guns, but if you took 4 of them away, it fits into your category better. You score higher on the whole thing, but you wanted to show all your stuff instead of just the 6 that were in that category.
Yeah, there's so much to it, but the one thing is we're all trying to expand the collecting group and share the knowledge and enjoy being a collector and associate with people of like-minded attitudes. And that's not just in firearm collecting, that's in any collecting group as a general rule. That's what people enjoy. So.
Well, and I think that's our responsibility as we talk about, as Steve just said on the thing, we're ambassadors. We should be taking our kids and our grandkids with us. We should be taking the neighbor kid. We should be answering questions, and we should do what we can do to further the love for all things firearms, all things mechanical, and the camaraderie that comes along with it, so that when they think back later, they think about the smiles and the laughs and the pranks and the friendship and the relationships, because that in the end is really what happens as we work to further our love for the Second Amendment and our love for all mechanical guns.
Right, and
absolutely.
Like I say about it's friendly, if you got a problem, those guys, one of them knows how to fix that problem or what's going on. It's funny, you can ask the group online, and they'll tell you how to take your gun apart, put it back together, why it doesn't work, or what pieces to look at or something. And it's funny that they can see it inside of their head what's broken without having to even see your gun.
Exactly. So Tyrone, why don't you tell folks the name of the Ruger Collectors Association that you belong to and how they can find them, because we're right at the top of the hour here.
Okay. Like I said, the Red Eagle News Exchange, or we call it RENE, it's published by Chad Hiddleston out of Iowa, and also the Ruger Owner Collector Society, also known as ROCS. The treasurer and everything based primarily out of Alabama, and you can go online and find Ruger Owner Collector Society, and you can join them there. They have a website, they have a forum. A lot of us are on there, and they'll all be more than willing to help and get you to join. And again, I think the next display show will be the July OGCA show in Wilmington, Ohio, and we're going to be there. And good Lord willing, and that's an easy way to get involved. And that's the two things I tell everybody. That's the best way to get started if you want to learn. And come on out and join us. We have a good time.
So, and that's whether you own a Ruger or whether you own any other kind of firearm. I mean, get to know its history, get to know
if you just want it.
Right. If you want to own more than one, right? It's all about the journey. It's not about the destination. It's all about the journey. Yep. So we wanted to introduce everybody to a little bit of the back world of collecting. And frankly, you cannot go wrong by buying a book. So if you have a gun that you want to know more about, you can pay $100, buy the book, because you can make a $100 mistake as you go to try to collect, and you don't know what you don't know. And
a famous dearly departed friend and collector, Carl Lacka, always said, read the manual. And I always enjoyed that.
I want to, as we go out the door here, and we've got about a minute left, I want to add that this is not just a Ruger or a Smith & Wesson or even a revolver thing. There are people, and I know personally people, who collect Gen 1 Glocks. Modern guns have collectors too. So it's fun
Yes.
talking about 1911s. It's fun talking about a lot of this stuff. And Rob, this has just been an hour version of your 15-minute gun history to me. It's been fun to just to listen and kick back and enjoy it. But I want to, if no matter what the firearm is out there, there are people that collect it. So
Bingo. Exactly.
all right.
Yep. Absolutely.
I think it is time to go ahead and shut it down. I want to remind everybody we do this every Wednesday night at 6 p.m. Central Time, 7 p.m. on the East Coast. Adjust for your own time zone if you live in the Western hinterlands. But in Arizona, who knows what time it is in Arizona? But anyway, every week, come join us. This is the one show I get to do where it's just kick back and have fun. The Daily Bullet, the Weekly Bullet, Polite Society podcast are all highly focused shows. This one can go anywhere, like it did tonight with collecting. Next week, as Amanda said, we're going to be talking specifically about the Supreme Court, how cases get there, how, for example, the SAF can join a case that they didn't originally start, or places like the Firearms Policy Coalition can join into cases they didn't initially start and help the case along. We're going to be talking about a lot of those things with Teresa Einacker of CNJFO and Holly, and help me out, Amanda. My brain isn't working right now.
Holly Sullivan of CCDL.
Okay, very cool. All right, that's going to do it for tonight. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you for your comments. They make things move much more smoothly. And Tyrone,
Thanks a lot,
thank
Tyrone.
you. Rob, thanks for steering the ship tonight, man.
No problem. Glad to help. Thank you all.
All right, we're going to
Appreciate it.